Her husband, under the mocking of his mother, persuaded his wife to collect his salary. But as she entered the boss's office, she couldn't believe her eyes, for at the table that morning, Christine woke up in a great mood, but as soon as she arrived at work, it evaporated instantly. She accidentally witnessed the store manager humiliating a colleague in public. "Do you lack the brains to display the merchandise properly?" the boss asked in a voice trembling with anger. "Why is it so messy?" Casting a glance at the display, Christine frowned. Everything was arranged perfectly. "Here we go again," she thought discontentedly. Frank Fraser had a reputation as a real tyrant. He constantly picked on employees and criticized them for no reason at all. It seemed this man literally fed off the negative energy of others. Many couldn't stand such pressure and quit. Christine would have gladly changed jobs herself, but her husband, especially her mother-in-law, opposed such a move, considering it too radical and dangerous for the family budget, so she had to endure. "I'm sorry, I'll fix everything right now," the employee said quietly and hurried to the display. As soon as she left, Frank Fraser noticed his next victim in the form of Christine and began to approach her. "Christine," the manager exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "And you just now arrived at work?" "It's only been 1 minute," Christine replied calmly. The boss was ready to choke on his indignation, then took a deep breath and delivered a furious tirade, even declaring that as punishment for being late, she would have to forfeit her lunch break. So it was no surprise that Christine returned home in a terrible mood. She had spent the whole day on her feet, not once sitting down, and since her boss was constantly watching her, there was no chance to distract herself with anything else. At home, she was greeted by her mother-in-law, who, surrounded by several photo albums, was reminiscing about the good old days. Once, her life had seemed like a fairy tale. A wealthy husband, beautiful clothes, constant parties, and travels. However, when her husband passed away, that era also came to an end. Maggie Gardner didn't delve into his affairs, trusting everything to a few managers who successfully embezzled the budget, leading the business to collapse. All the main assets were spent, and what was left barely sufficed to maintain their former standard of living. "How happy we were back then," her mother-in-law sighed theatrically, wiping away an invisible tear. "Don't worry, Mom, we will definitely get everything back," Gabriel assured her confidently, hugging her shoulders. When Gabriel took over the management of the company, everything was already hopelessly lost. Therefore, the only thing he managed to do as the owner was to sell the company to someone else, but on the condition that he would be retained as a hired worker. Gabriel and his mother were convinced that they would still be able to reclaim the business for themselves. Christine often heard such conversations but tried not to get involved. It wasn't her concern. She viewed this idea with great skepticism because her husband had been just an employee for several years and he had never been promoted even once. He talked a lot but did far too little to turn his and his mother's dreams into reality. Christine, Gabriel, noticing his wife, immediately approached her. "I have a small favor to ask." "Could you?" He couldn't continue as he broke into a fit of coughing. "Are you sick?" his wife asked worriedly, touching his forehead. "You don't seem to have a fever." "Not right now," Gabriel began to complain, "but during the day, it was nearly 40 degrees. Can you imagine?" "Christine, you need to come by my office tomorrow to pick up my bonus." "I'm afraid I won't make it to work." "Is it that bad?" she asked in surprise. "Poor Gabriel lay in bed all day today. He only managed to get up in the evening when I finally got his fever down. His mother supported him, so you should go tomorrow, Christine." "Well, since that's the case, of course, I'll go," she agreed easily, "especially since I have a day off tomorrow." "Well, that's wonderful," her husband beamed. Until that day, Christine had only been to her husband's office a couple of times, and even then she waited for him in the lobby, never stepping inside the office. Life in the company was bustling. At first, no one even paid her any attention. The secretary was on the phone with someone, and employees rushed around, passing documents to each other. When Christine walked deeper into the office, she accidentally brushed against the plant, which toppled to the floor with a loud crash. Suddenly, all eyes turned to her. They looked at her with suspicion, and someone even began to whisper quietly. A young woman approached her and silently placed the battered plant back in its place. That's when Christine realized it wasn't about the plant at all, as everyone continued to glance at her oddly. She felt very uncomfortable. She didn't know any of these people, but she felt guilty in front of them, even though she had nothing to apologize for. Overcoming her embarrassment, she addressed the young woman to ask where she could collect her husband's money. The woman replied, but did so with such an expression that made Christine feel even more uneasy, and on her shaky legs, she made her way to the director's office. When the door closed behind her and the imposing chair turned so that she could see the person sitting in it, Christine nearly cried out in horror. She took a deep breath and clenched her fists. Sitting beside her, as if on a throne, was a woman who had once been her school nightmare. She had turned Christine's teenage years into a real hell. "Well, what are you standing there for?" The woman smirked with the devilish smile Christine remembered from her school days. "Sit down." If she hadn't sat down at that moment, she would have certainly fainted. Christine struggled to contain her feelings. They were about to burst out and overwhelm her completely. In that instant, she felt like a defenseless schoolgirl who was about to be humiliated again. Memories crashed over her like a frenzied whirlwind. There she was, standing in her brand new blouse, while that classmate Samantha mocked her poverty. "What are those rags you're wearing?" Samantha pointed disdainfully in her direction. "Did you go shopping in a dumpster again?" After those words, the whole class erupted in loud laughter, and Christine tried to hold back her tears. "It's a perfectly fine blouse," she attempted to defend herself, but it came out weakly. "My mom bought it for me at the store." "Who are you fooling?" The wealthy classmate continued to taunt her. "Where would you get money for a store if you're always complaining?" At the memory, Christine's body was covered in goosebumps. She frantically started checking her appearance, trying to find some flaw and predict what Samantha would say about it. "How about some coffee?" the woman said with feigned politeness. "Just be careful, or you'll get another stain." She innocently fluttered her eyelashes. At that moment, Christine's memory threw up another recollection she desperately wanted to forget. It was her last year of school. And by then, Christine had already started working so she wouldn't have to ask her mother for money and could buy her own clothes. She worked a lot. She bought herself a beautiful dress and went straight to school in it. That day she received many compliments, which infuriated Samantha. Then, the classmate spilled brown paint on her chair and pushed Christine onto it. The delicate pink fabric immediately stained. She didn't realize something was wrong at first. She sat through an entire lesson and later walked around the school with a large brown stain. After that incident, everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, started to mock her. Even first graders pointed at her. The classmates even came up with a derogatory nickname. After that, Christine cried all night long. She begged her mother to change schools because she didn't want to go back after such humiliation. But her mother insisted that she finish her studies. After all, there were only 2 months left. But those 2 months felt like pure hell. Christine cried almost every day. "I refuse," Christine gritted her teeth. With each passing minute, it became harder to maintain her composure. Samantha, on the other hand, reveled in the situation. She had recently become the director of the firm when her father bought it and offered his beloved daughter a high position. A few days ago, she became bored and deliberately asked Gabriel to send Christine for the money, just to entertain herself a little. Then catch. Samantha threw an envelope with money at her, which, if Christine hadn't extended her hands, would have hit her right in the face. The envelope fell to the floor, and the money scattered everywhere. Christine felt her right eye beginning to twitch. Just like in school, in the most tense moments of anxiety. "Well, what are you looking at?" Samantha smirked. "Go ahead and collect what your husband earned through his hard work." Christine felt her face flush. She sank to the floor and started picking up the money. The biting feeling of humiliation, familiar from her school days, washed over her again. "Good girl. Now get lost," Samantha said disdainfully, leaning back in her chair. Christine flew out of her office like a bullet. She frantically searched for the restroom to compose herself. "Wait," Christine heard a voice behind her and turned around. An elderly woman was chasing her, holding a mop. As soon as they were side by side, the old lady discreetly whispered to her that they needed to talk and that she would wait outside. "What did you want to tell me?" Christine asked immediately as soon as they met in the backyard. "Oh, my dear girl, those fiends have completely muddled your head," the cleaner exclaimed, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. Christine looked at her in confusion. Then the elderly woman, with vivid detail, told her that her husband and former classmate had staged that spectacle to humiliate her. "I heard it all myself," she thumped her chest. Christine didn't know how to respond. The puzzle in her head just wouldn't fit together. She didn't understand why Gabriel would set her up like that. They often locked themselves in the new boss's office. The cleaner lowered her voice to a whisper, hinting that her husband was cheating. Christine returned home completely shattered. Her head throbbed from the weight of so many emotions. "Your money." Christine handed her husband the envelope. Gabriel was very pleased. He immediately began counting the earnings. Gradually, his eyebrows rose, and he nodded approvingly. "Thank you, darling." Her husband smiled, kissing her cheek. "How's your health?" Christine inquired, remembering that he had said he was sick yesterday. "I'm getting better," Gabriel replied cheerfully. Christine tried to find evidence of his infidelity in his behavior. However, he acted as usual. "I met your boss," Christine attempted to infuse her voice with as much calm as possible. However, the memories of her encounter with Samantha still stirred up a storm of negative emotions. "Did you know she was my classmate?" Christine recounted to her husband what she had endured during her teenage years, so he was aware of what she had suffered because of Samantha. "Really?" Gabriel feigned surprise. "It must have been nice to reconnect after so many years." "Not at all," Christine exclaimed impulsively. "It was Samantha. I told you about her." "No way." Her husband whistled. "What a small world." Christine had no reason not to trust Gabriel. So she simply nodded and changed the subject. At that moment, her mother-in-law intervened, who had been quietly knitting until then. "Good job, son," she said approvingly. "At least someone in this house is making money instead of walking around and constantly whining about how tired they are." This was clearly a jab at Christine, as she had recently shared her concerns about her store with her mother-in-law. "Thank you, Mom." Gabriel smiled, carefully putting the envelope in his pocket. "Christine will never earn that much money in her life," the elderly woman remarked with a sneer, "though what's surprising about that? Who learned from whom? Some are destined to spend their lives as errand runners, while others," she patted her son on the shoulder, "work with their minds." To Christine's surprise, her husband did not come to her defense but supported his mother, laughing along with her. This was a low blow that finally took the wind out of her sails. Along with her mood, her appetite vanished. So, Christine went to the bedroom and locked herself in. Her husband had a habit of falling asleep on the couch in front of the television, so she often spent nights alone. After setting several alarms, Christine prepared for bed, deciding to arrive early the next day to avoid any complaints from her boss. Sleep wouldn't come, though. Thoughts about that day kept swirling in her head. Each time, she returned to her encounter with Samantha and berated herself for swallowing it all silently, for not being able to defend herself. "Just like in school," she said sadly, leaning back against the pillow. From the kitchen, the cheerful voices of her husband and mother-in-law drifted in, making Christine feel even worse. She wanted tomorrow to come already so she could finally go to work, where they would keep her busy enough to avoid despairing thoughts. Trying to distract herself, Christine decided to spend some time on social media. She rarely went there and had last posted pictures before her marriage. Looking at the recent photos of her classmates, she sadly noticed that many of them had already become mothers. This topic was painful for her because she really wanted a child. She had been pregnant twice, but each time something went wrong. "Oh, if I had a baby, it would be so much easier now," Christine thought in deep distress before finally drifting off to sleep. Despite arriving at work early the next day and even arranging the clothes the way the manager liked, he still had complaints, which he didn't hesitate to voice right from the morning. "In the past month, I've been missing a significant amount of merchandise." After those words, Christine's eyes widened in shock. It turned out that all this time, a large-scale audit had been secretly conducted without the employee's knowledge, revealing numerous violations. "You think I won't figure out that one of you is stealing things and selling them for your own profit?" The boss continued his tirade, constantly casting angry glances at Christine. She didn't know how to react to all of this. She had never stolen in her life, but how could she explain that to Frank, who already disliked her? Looking around, Christine began to consider who among her colleagues could have done such a thing. Maybe it's Magdalene? Christine pondered, glancing at her partner, who worked on weekends. They weren't particularly friendly, as Christine didn't understand many of her colleagues' life principles and values. However, she was sure that Magdalene wasn't known for her honesty and could very well be involved in something like this. "Christine, stay behind," the manager said at the end of the meeting, and his eyes gleamed slyly. The other employees hurriedly left to avoid crossing paths with the manager. "Did you think you could get away unscathed?" The man squinted as he approached her closely. Even though he was acting like an angry boss, he was secretly elated. Finally, he had the chance to fire an unwanted employee. Christine had displeased him from the very first day. However, he had hesitated to remove her right away because the store owner had conducted the interview personally. "Mr. Fraser, I swear to you, it wasn't me," Christine immediately protested. "Christine, don't try to sweet-talk me." "Who then, if not you?" the manager sneered. Christine nervously bit her lip, debating whether to mention her suspicions about Magdalene or not. On the one hand, she was confident in her reasoning, but on the other, she had no evidence to accuse anyone. "Well, I figured you wouldn't have anything to say," Frank Fraser smirked in response to her silence. "Go ahead, gather your things. I don't need thieves in my store." Christine packed up while wiping away tears. The injustice suffocated her, but she felt powerless to change anything. When the news of her dismissal reached home, it turned into a full-blown scandal. "Christine, are you out of your mind?" her husband exclaimed, eyes wide. "How could you let this happen? It's really hard to find work now. You won't get hired anywhere." She had hoped to feel better at home, but instead, it only got worse. Instead of support, she received nothing but a barrage of reproaches. "And what's my fault in this? I'm telling you, I was fired unfairly," she repeated again, her voice trembling with hurt. "Don't you have the words to negotiate with the management?" Her husband continued to press her. "If you weren't guilty, they wouldn't have fired you. What, did you pocket a few thousand and don't want to admit it?" Christine was ready to boil over from such insolence. "How can you even say that?" she exclaimed, outraged. "I've never taken anything that wasn't mine." Her husband rolled his eyes. "So what are you going to do now? Hang around my neck? I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to support you." Her mother-in-law, watching the argument between her son and daughter-in-law, only smirked. The expression on her face clearly read, "I told you she's good for nothing," and the elderly woman had no intention of supporting her. Unable to withstand such pressure, Christine burst into tears again. Quickly washing her face to hide her breakdown from her husband, she tried to slip into the bedroom, but Gabriel blocked her path. "I just remembered. We need a second cleaner in the office," he said. "The first one is already of a respectable age, so we need an assistant. You could come tomorrow and talk to the boss. Since you know each other, she might hire you on the side." The prospect of working under Samantha made Christine's skin crawl. If during the 10 minutes they had met, she had almost driven her to a nervous breakdown, what could happen in an entire day? And in a month? Christine shook her head vigorously. No, I'd rather look for another option, she said. Christine, tell me, are you completely foolish? Her husband grimaced. What other option do you think you're going to find? As if you're capable of anything other than handing out clothes and cleaning floors. Christine swallowed her hurt to avoid escalating an already tense situation. How can I work for her? She said in a completely colorless voice. You know I suffered because of her in school. You'll work, like a good girl, if you want to have money, her mother-in-law chimed in, suddenly appearing beside them. The mother and son began to push her actively. In the end, Christine surrendered, agreeing to talk to Samantha the next day. The interview she was encouraged to attend felt more like yet another act of humiliation. The former classmate had a great time interviewing her. It was no surprise that they told us in school we needed to study hard so we wouldn't end up working as a janitor, Samantha smirked. Your example is proof of that. In school, Christine had been a good student, almost an honor student. The only 4 she had was in math. She had never been particularly good at that subject. Samantha, on the other hand, graduated with a gold medal, although it was no secret that her daddy had bought it for her. To keep you from getting bored, I've already thought of a task for you, the boss smiled sarcastically and at that moment knocked over the freshly brewed coffee that the secretary had made. Clean it up and make sure the floor shines. And so Christine began to clean. Moreover, the boss didn't leave her office but continued to watch the scene. Christine left there red as a lobster. The feeling of shame and resentment literally gnawed at her to the bone. Is money worth such humiliation? She thought to herself. Poor girl, they really ran you ragged. The elderly cleaner said in a gentle voice, offering her coffee. Here, have some, take a break. And I brought pie too. Have some of that as well. You look like you haven't eaten today. Thank you so much. Christine said, touched, completely unexpected for such care. She really had been worked to the bone today. Samantha hinted to the staff that the new cleaner could be actively exploited, and everyone immediately took advantage of it. She crossed paths with her husband a couple of times in the hallway. However, Gabriel strictly forbade her from telling anyone that they were married or even approaching him. I thought everyone already knew I was your wife, Christine said, bewildered, when he caught her in an empty hallway. Even if they do, there's no need to remind them, Gabriel snapped. Relationships are forbidden in our company. After that conversation, whenever she saw her husband, she tried to lower her eyes to the floor and pretend they didn't know each other. Nevertheless, she didn't want to believe that her husband could be cheating on her. He wouldn't have offered me a job in his office if he was involved with someone else, Christine concluded confidently, calming down. The new job took much more energy than the previous one. Not only was she forced to scrub the office to a shine every day, but they also pressured her morally. The staff quickly realized that the new cleaner was also a punching bag. Therefore, they treated her poorly. The only person she could talk to was an elderly colleague who asked to be called Brenda. She often felt sorry for her, encouraged her, and at the end of the workday, when the employees finally went home, they often chatted about life over a cup of coffee and some pie. On one of those days, Brenda shared her story. I was once married, I was happy and raising a daughter. The elderly woman drifted into memories, then came some dark times. First, my husband passed away from cancer, then my daughter left me with my grandson Ernest just a couple of months after giving birth. And what about his father? Christine asked. What father? Brenda threw her hands up. The son turned out to be unwanted, and a couple of months after my daughter's death, he disappeared. So now I'm raising the boy alone. He's a lovely child. As if to confirm her words, the next day Brenda brought her grandson to work with her. Can you believe it? The kindergarten closed for quarantine, Brenda said, and what am I supposed to do with Ernest? I just had to bring him along. Christine immediately found common ground with the little boy. Ernest turned out to be kind and well-mannered. He patiently waited for his grandmother in the storage room. Once, she even gave him a chocolate bar, which earned her his lasting affection. Thus, the grandson came to work for a week, and no one even noticed him. At the end of the workday, when Brenda thought everyone had left, she allowed him to play in the office. Playing around, the boy somehow ended up in the director's office without realizing it. The first thing he saw there was a wallet lying directly on the floor. He remembered how they had once found a wallet while walking with his grandmother, and she had returned it to a very grateful man. That was when Ernest first learned about doing a good deed, and he wanted to be praised again. Running up to the wallet, he picked it up, but suddenly money, business cards, and photographs spilled out. "Ernest, where have you been?" came Christine's voice from the hallway as she looked for him. Seeing that the door to Samantha's office was wide open, she entered and found the child. "What are you doing here?" Christine was surprised. "I found a wallet," Ernest shouted excitedly, pointing at his discovery. When Christine stepped closer and leaned down, her gaze fell on a photograph lying a little further away. It captured a man and a woman embracing each other. To be precise, it was Samantha and her husband, Gabriel. Christine immediately dropped to the floor, covering her mouth with her hand. "So it's true," she thought to herself. A slight tremor coursed through her body as it dawned on her that her husband, to whom she had confided all her sufferings, had betrayed her with her enemy. "Sweetie, go to Grandma, I'll return this lost item myself," Christine said, barely holding back tears. She didn't want to scare the child, so she only let her feelings flow when his footsteps faded in the hallway. Now she felt such pain as if all her bones had been broken at once. Looking around, she felt nausea creeping up her throat. After all, most likely, Gabriel had been cheating on her right in this very office, where she was now crying so fiercely. Brenda's words about how they often locked themselves in here echoed in her head, and her lungs felt squeezed. Suddenly, laughter echoed in the hallway. Christine quickly got to her feet and wiped her tears. Apparently, she and Brenda weren't the only ones who thought the office was empty. Her husband appeared in the doorway, hugging Samantha around the waist. In the manager's hand was a half-empty bottle of wine. "Christine?" her husband said in shock, stepping away from his mistress. "Why are you still here? Weren't you supposed to have gone home long ago?" "You can stop pretending," she said hoarsely, throwing the wallet with the photographs onto the table. "I know you're cheating on me with Marcus right behind my back." Gabriel took a deep breath, bringing his hands behind his head. This was not how he had intended to tell his wife about his affair. And Samantha was terribly pleased. She had once again managed to jab at the poor woman's wounds. I, Gabriel stammered, unsure of what to say to her, but Samantha cut him off harshly. "You're so pathetic and useless that even your husband left you." She smirked. Christine realized she could no longer remain silent. After this, it was unlikely she would keep her job, so she had nothing left to lose. "Why do you do all this?" she asked in a lifeless voice. "Why are you constantly trying to hurt or humiliate me? What in your life are you so desperately trying to compensate for? What are you babbling about, you weirdo?" Samantha clearly didn't understand her. "I mean that despite all the glitter you surround yourself with," Christine continued, "you remain a weak, insecure person, and you try to elevate yourself by belittling others." Samantha immediately flared up and ordered her to get out immediately and never return to the office, which had been obvious from the start. "And that old lady can go with you," the manager spat. "What has Brenda done wrong?" Christine exclaimed, her eyes wide. She no longer cared about herself, but she didn't want a good elderly woman to lose her job because of her. "You should have kept an eye on your little puppy," she repeated even more spitefully. It was pointless to say anything, so Christine immediately left. She understood that she would no longer be living under the same roof as her husband, so she went to get her things. She prayed that her mother-in-law would be preoccupied with her own affairs and wouldn't notice her. "Oh, our cleaner is back," her mother-in-law sneered as she met her at the entrance. "Where's Gabriel?" Christine took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "He's staying late at work," she replied shortly. "My poor son," the elderly woman began to lament. "Just look how hard he's working to get the company back." Here we go again with her favorite record, Christine thought irritably as she slipped into her room. She started throwing the most necessary things into her suitcase indiscriminately and managed to finish fairly quickly. "Are you going somewhere?" Just as she was about to leave, Gabriel's mother swooped in like a hawk. "Far away from here," Christine replied, opening the door. But her mother-in-law blocked her way. "What does that mean?" she exclaimed almost hysterically. "That means," Christine hissed, as all this was beginning to irritate her considerably, "your son is cheating on me, and I refuse to live under the same roof with him." Christine pushed her mother-in-law aside and stepped out the door. Behind her, she heard a quiet, "So you found out?" This made her smile nervously. Of course, his mother was in the loop, as Gabriel had never kept secrets from her. "What a fool I am," Christine thought bitterly. Just then, she wanted to call a friend to ask if she could stay the night when she received a call from Brenda. "Christine. Christine." A crying voice of Ernest came from the other end. "I'm listening, my dear." "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" she asked anxiously. "Grandma's heart is hurting. They took her to the hospital." "I'm scared," the child began to whimper. At that moment, Christine's heart sank. "Where are you now?" "I'll come to you," she promised. "I'm at the hospital too," Ernest replied. Christine quickly called for a taxi. It turned out that after Christine left work, Samantha had caused a scene in front of the elderly cleaner. After that, she was shamefully fired. The woman was very upset, and when she got home, she felt unwell and then completely lost consciousness. Although Ernest was very scared, he ran to the neighbors, who called an ambulance. Christine arrived quickly, and along with Ernest, they waited for the doctor. The boy looked pale. He was terribly frightened, and Christine couldn't calm him down. Noticing the doctor coming out of the operating room, Christine sent Ernest to get some water and approached him herself. "How is Brenda?" she immediately asked. "The patient suffered a heart attack, but her condition has stabilized," the doctor summarized briefly. "Can we see her?" "Yes, but only for a short time. She's still weak." Christine reassured Ernest, and together they hurried to the grandmother's room. Upon seeing Brenda, Christine felt a pang in her heart. The elderly woman looked very pale and appeared small and defenseless in the hospital bed. The boy also initially didn't know how to behave. He cast a worried glance at Christine, as if asking whether it was okay to approach his grandmother. "Don't you want to hug me?" Brenda's weak voice called out, and Ernest immediately ran to her. Christine didn't stay in the room long. Brenda asked her to stay with her and look after her grandson until she got better. "Oh, if that ever happens." She smiled sadly when the grandson left the room. "Don't even think like that," Christine exclaimed. "Of course, you'll get better." Brenda wasn't feeling so positive. She had a premonition that her time was short, and she needed to settle all her affairs as quickly as possible. First and foremost, she thought of her grandson, who had no one but her. "Thank goodness this girl came into our lives. I hope she will take care of Ernest," Brenda thought, and it made her feel a little better. The next day, she invited a notary to draft a will in Christine's name. She had no doubt that she would manage her assets correctly, and when the time came, she would pass everything on to Ernest. Life in the new house left Christine no opportunity to mourn her crumbling marriage. All her thoughts were occupied with Ernest, who needed care, and Brenda, whom they visited every day. If it weren't for her husband's calls, which she preferred not to answer, she would have completely forgotten about his existence. Her mind was busy with entirely different matters. One day, as she and Ernest were preparing to visit Brenda as usual, the hospital suddenly called. "Please accept my condolences, but the patient passed away just a few minutes ago," said a monotonous voice. Christine collapsed onto the nearby sofa and lost her ability to speak. It was the thing she feared most in the world. That evening, a difficult conversation awaited her with Ernest. Before that, she cried all her tears into a pillow so as not to frighten him anymore. She saw how hard and scared he was, so after she finished the call, she hugged him tightly, promising that she would never leave him. "Is Grandma with Mommy now?" the boy asked very quietly. "Yes, sweetie," Christine said, wiping away a tear. "Now they'll both be watching over you." The organization of the funeral fell to Christine. Brenda didn't have many acquaintances or friends, so the ceremony was rather modest. Throughout this time, Christine stayed close to the child so he wouldn't feel abandoned. Ernest seemed to endure everything like a little soldier, and Christine was very proud of him. When all the words were said, and Brenda's body was buried, an unfamiliar man approached Christine, looking disheveled. "Are you the one living in the late woman's house?" he asked bluntly. "Yes," Christine said, bewildered. "Who are you?" "I'm her son-in-law and Ernest's father," the man announced proudly. He waved at his son, but the boy hid behind Christine. She remembered Brenda's stories. The elderly woman had never had kind feelings for the man who had run away from his son, "and so I'm giving you a few days to move out and return the keys to me," he ordered. Christine was taken aback by such audacity. She handed Ernest off to a neighbor and continued her conversation with his father. "What's your name?" she inquired. "Oswald." "Well, Oswald," Christine began to grow angry, "I won't be giving you anything. Brenda asked me to take care of her grandson, and as I know, you don't want him, so don't hope for anything. You won't get anything from me." His pupils dilated with rage. Christine exhaled, noting that there were many people around, and it was unlikely he would resort to violence, even though he looked threatening. "This is my house," Ernest's father shouted. "This old hag has no one but me and the boy." "You can think whatever you want," Christine retorted, "but I won't let you even step through the door," she added disdainfully. Christine remembered that this man had lost his parental rights a few years ago due to alcoholism. She grimaced, noting that he still reeked of alcohol. "No, I won't let him near Ernest for even a yard," she promised herself. "I'll sue you," Oswald threatened before he left. The next day, to avoid wasting time, Christine contacted the notary to confirm her rights to the house. Simultaneously, she began the process of arranging guardianship over the child. She worried that Ernest might be given back to his father, and then the boy would have nothing good awaiting him. "Don't worry, his parental rights cannot be restored," they assured her at the notary's office, and she was able to breathe a little easier. Christine was concerned that she might not be granted guardianship since she was still considered unemployed. However, a miracle happened. She was allowed to take Ernest. She tried to create all the conditions so that the child wouldn't feel unhappy. Right after his grandmother's funeral, the boy shut down and practically stopped talking. A couple of times, his biological father tried to contact him, but this only frightened him more. Christine even took Ernest to a psychologist, but she was told that he just needed time to recover. And, of course, love, so he wouldn't feel lonely. One day, when Christine was picking up Ernest from kindergarten, she received a call from her husband again. She finally decided to answer. Well. A mocking voice came from the other end. "You finally deigned to pick up the phone." "I was very busy," Christine replied. "I hope you're calling to discuss the divorce?" "Right on target." Gabriel chuckled. "It's about time to end our marriage. Finally, I'll be happy." With Samantha, the man added deliberately to irritate her, but Christine was already completely indifferent. "Then I suggest we settle this tomorrow," ignoring the last remark, Christine said and hung up. Gabriel felt like a winner. Everything was going according to his plan. He was almost rid of Christine, he just needed to marry Samantha, and then, as a wedding gift, ask his father-in-law for the company he had been dreaming about for years. "Good job, son," his mother said approvingly, rubbing her hands together in anticipation. "I knew you could restore your father's business. You are so talented." However, the potential bride had a completely different opinion. Samantha didn't think of marrying Gabriel at all. She only needed him to get back at her former classmate. Even now, when she saw his call, she silenced her phone and tossed it into her bag, continuing to have dinner with another man. "Is it something important?" her companion inquired. "No, not at all." She smirked. "Just one incompetent employee who can't take a step without me." Samantha often thought it was time to end this charade. She had had enough fun at Christine's expense, and she no longer wanted to endure Gabriel's presence, especially with so many interesting men around her. Meanwhile, Christine's life began to improve gradually. Ernest was coming around. That's when she realized it was time to look for a new job. It just didn't feel right to sit around doing nothing. Christine found several suitable options and even went for an interview when her phone rang, an unknown number. But something inside told her she should answer the call. "Hello, Christine," a pleasant male voice said. "Good afternoon. Do we know each other?" she asked immediately. "This is Marcus, the owner of the clothing store Dream. We met a year and a half ago. Remember, I hired you?" he explained. Christine remembered. However, it felt like all those events had happened in some other, past life. Everything was completely different now. "I've heard the news that you were unfairly fired, and I want to correct this situation. Can you come by now?" Christine was taken aback. She was sure she would never return there. Moreover, other people were waiting for her. The girl knew that the right answer was no, but she couldn't deny that she truly loved the store she had worked at and would be genuinely happy to return. "Okay, I'll be there soon," she exhaled and changed her route. When she arrived at the store, Marcus personally greeted her. He explained that he had conducted his own investigation and discovered who was really responsible for the theft and resale of merchandise. "And who is it?" Christine asked, having her suspicions. "It's not just one person," the owner smirked. "They were working in pairs. Your partner Magdalene and manager Frank Fraser. But don't worry, both have already been fired, and a case has been opened against them." Christine nodded, noting that she had indeed been right in her guesses. "If you already found the guilty parties, why did you call me?" she asked reasonably. "I want you to return to work," Marcus explained. "I know you used to perform your duties excellently. Customers were pleased with you. Therefore, I want to offer you the chance to replace the manager." Christine stared at him, wide-eyed. She had never thought that a promotion might be in her future. "I agree," she replied almost immediately, earning a pleased smile from the owner. At first, Christine worried that she wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility placed on her, but very soon she was reassured otherwise. The staff treated her well. Even in such a high position, she didn't behave arrogantly. After the tyrant Frank, who tormented everyone, Christine found the management to be quite agreeable. It seemed that the warming of relations in the store was felt by the customers as well, as sales had increased over the past week, which pleased the store owner immensely. Marcus, who had previously relied completely on the manager, now frequently visited his location. Mrs. Freeman, one day a new employee rushed up to her with panic in her eyes. "We have a problem. Minerva couldn't come to work, her son broke his leg, and we're in real trouble. We can't handle it." "All right, calm down," Christine said. "As far as I remember, we have another employee who is on leave. Let's call him." "Yes, I suppose we can," Wilma said thoughtfully, "but he lost his father the day before yesterday, so," she hesitated, and Christine allowed her to stop. "I understand. Then I'll work the counter myself," she decided, not thinking of anything better. Wilma's eyes widened. Where was it ever seen that a boss would work alongside everyone like that? But Christine didn't care. First and foremost, she was responsible for ensuring the store ran smoothly, and it didn't matter how she ensured that. Marcus watched the scene closely. Christine managed to surprise him. She demonstrated not only excellent leadership skills, but also human qualities, which were especially rare in the modern world, making them very valuable. At the end of the day, Christine let down her strict bun, and her long hair fell in waves over her shoulders. At that moment, she caught Marcus's gaze, which was fixed on her intently. It wasn't the look of a boss trying to catch his employee making a mistake, but rather a look that men usually give attractive women. Christine was the first to drop her eyes. Her face flushed, and from that moment on, she often caught Marcus's gaze on her, noting that she even liked it. For the first time in a long time, Christine could look at herself from the outside and remember that she wasn't so unattractive after all. She realized she needed to take advantage of her job in a clothing store. So at the end of the workday, she asked a few consultants to stay late to help her choose a dress. The next day, Christine was shining brighter than 1,000 suns. "You look magnificent," Marcus said. "Thank you," Christine replied, blushing. "How about we have dinner together tonight?" Deciding to spend the evening with her boss, Christine realized that he was an incredibly interesting man. He had a way of putting people at ease. "Goodness, it seems I'm losing my mind," she had to admit to herself. Marcus talked about himself. That's how Christine learned that he had been married before but had divorced a couple of months ago after catching his wife cheating. "Yes, that sounds familiar," she smiled sadly. "Were you cheated on too?" Marcus asked. "Yes. And it was with a woman who once brought a lot of pain." The trustful atmosphere encouraged Christine to be open. So she told Marcus about everything that had happened to her since her dismissal. As she recounted it, it was as if she relived those moments all over again. By the end, Marcus looked completely bewildered. "I'm sorry for unloading all this on you," she said apologetically. No, Marcus took her hand and squeezed it. "I'm just surprised that such strength and resilience can exist in such a fragile and beautiful woman. Not every man possesses that." Christine gave him a warm smile. No one had said such words to her in a long time. And that's when things began to change. For the first time in a long time, she felt happy. Although she had been married for several years, it was only now that she realized that she truly had a man by her side whom she could rely on. Soon, Marcus met Ernest. Christine worried about how the boy would react, but everything went remarkably well. They shook hands, and when Marcus gave the child a toy car, Ernest was absolutely thrilled. "It's a police car," the boy exclaimed, practically breathless. "I wanted one just like this." At that sight, Christine's heart was ready to melt. The only thing that overshadowed her life was the fact that Gabriel had somehow stopped wanting to give her a divorce. Samantha had left him after all, and he was left with nothing. In an instant, all his dreams of restoring his father's business crumbled like a house of cards. Upon learning that Christine had started dating a wealthy man, Gabriel flatly refused to divorce her. She waited for him outside the courthouse for half an hour. He didn't show up. After calling him several times, she finally received a message that he had changed his mind. A couple of days later, her mother-in-law reached out to her. "Oh, Christine," she sighed dramatically, "Gabriel is suffering so much since you left. Come back home, we miss you terribly." "Maggie Gardner, I'm not coming back." "I want to divorce your son," Christine replied irritably. "But how can you say that? You've been married for so many years." "Christine, that's not right. You have to learn to forgive. Yes, Gabriel made a mistake, but he's a man. You can understand him," the mother-in-law said, doing her best to defend her son. Christine didn't want to listen any longer, so she simply hung up the phone. With the help of the lawyers Marcus hired for her, she was able to divorce Gabriel through the court, and now she was completely free from her past. Marcus also ensured that Gabriel wouldn't come within a meter of her. He did everything to make Christine simply happy. One day, he even brought Samantha into the store. Christine was utterly shocked and looked at him in confusion. "Hi. I came to apologize," Samantha said through gritted teeth. "I was unfair to you in school and at work. I'm very sorry." It didn't take a keen person to realize that these apologies lacked sincerity. But Christine nodded anyway. "And I apologize for your husband too," Samantha continued. "I didn't need him, I just wanted to get under your skin. Feel free to take him, he's free." Christine waved her hand dismissively. When Samantha disappeared through the door, Christine overheard a snippet of her conversation with Marcus. "So now you'll restore my funding?" Samantha huffed. "Not a chance," Marcus smiled widely. "What?" Samantha squeaked in outrage. "We had an agreement." "When did you ever keep your agreements?" He retorted sharply, alluding to the many broken commitments that had occurred because of her. "I want you to finally feel what it's like for those you've betrayed and humiliated. Consider it your karma," and with that, Marcus asked for Samantha to be escorted out of his store. He knew that her father had recently turned his back on her, stopped supporting her, leaving her with only one company that was rapidly approaching bankruptcy, with Marcus's investments being the only thing holding it together, which he had now ceased. "So you did this for me?" Christine asked, peering out from the office. She couldn't deny that seeing her former classmate brought low was satisfying. "I just wanted her to face the consequences she deserves," Marcus replied, hugging her, "but I won't let anyone else hurt you," he whispered in her ear. A couple of months later, they got married. Christine and Ernest moved into Marcus's house. She didn't sell Brenda's apartment, believing that when Ernest grew up, he would decide what to do with it, and for now, it could simply be rented out to save money for the boy. When marrying Marcus, Christine immediately mentioned that she probably wouldn't be able to have children. "I've had 2 miscarriages," she confessed honestly. "Christine, I love you and want to share my remaining life with you, so it doesn't matter to me whether we have children or not," Marcus replied. Christine understood that he was saying those words to comfort her. And she knew perfectly well that Marcus would still like to have his own child. This was evident in his eyes when he spent time with Ernest. And then a real miracle happened. Christine, feeling some changes in her body, decided to take a pregnancy test, and it turned out to be positive. At that moment, her joyful screams nearly echoed throughout the house, but she found the strength to keep this news hidden until she spoke with a doctor. Fortunately, the pregnancy was confirmed. And then she hurried to tell her husband. "Marcus, I'm pregnant," Christine declared triumphantly as she burst into his office. He immediately tore himself away from the paperwork he was reviewing and was by her side in an instant. "Is it true? Are you sure?" he said with a slightly trembling voice. "Yes, just got back from the doctor," Christine said. She had never seen Marcus so happy. He impulsively hugged her and spun her around in the air. He asked a million questions about how she was feeling, but Christine quickly assured him that she and the baby were doing just fine. "Then I'm firing you," the soon-to-be father said with a grin. "What?" Christine exclaimed, not understanding how he could say such a thing. "I've wanted to do this for a long time. My wife shouldn't have to work so hard. And now that you have new responsibilities," he looked at her belly with satisfaction, "I simply won't allow you to go back to work. You will be focusing on a much more responsible and important mission." "Well, Marcus," Christine weakly tried to protest, "I do love my job. Besides, I'm still early enough along to keep working." "I don't want to hear it," her husband cut her off, already preparing the necessary paperwork for her termination. She had no choice but to agree. Marcus did everything to ensure that she was surrounded by love and care. He decided that they needed to go on a vacation to some warm country because his pregnant wife shouldn't have to endure a cold winter. Christine agreed with this idea, and they set off on their trip. Ernest was beside himself with joy since he had never flown on a plane before. Over the past few months, they had become a true family, and Christine and Marcus sometimes completely forgot that Ernest had once not been their own. It wasn't long before he started calling them Mom and Dad. Christine promised herself to do everything she could to ensure that their children grew up in love and care. She gently stroked her rounded belly and looked at her husband. She knew he shared her desire, and that made her heart feel very warm.